Hello everybody and welcome into my latest live broadcast. Today it is Thursday, the 19th of January, 2023. My name is Kerry Holzman. Kerry Holzman, not Scary Holzman, although sometimes. And I'm a real working computer technician and have been working professionally in the industry for over 30 years. And I decided YouTube needs more professionals to counterbalance all of the enthusiasts for giving information that's more practical, reasonable, and more likely that the vast majority of computer owners would find more relative to their needs than the enthusiasts and hobbyists, which are a very, very small percentage overall of folks who have computers. So this is a channel for everybody. And the enthusiasts, well, they have plenty to choose from. And if something were to shift and there are more professionals making YouTube videos in this genre, then I would be doing something else. So I hope you'll appreciate the different take that I have on things where we're well grounded in what is practical and common and moving away from the expensive and finicky and fickle world of enthusiasts, which there's nothing wrong with that. I'm just sick of it. It's just, that's all I see on YouTube are, for the most part, all enthusiast-based content. And there just needs to be a counter to that, I think. And so that's why I'm here doing what I'm doing. And in that regard, I'll go into some more technical stuff in many cases than most enthusiasts will go into. And I can also explain why, versus just ritualizing a process without really understanding why that process is the way it is or how it used to be and how it's developed. I can explain all of that because I've been living it daily for over 30 years and I want to share my experience with you. But I also want you to know the way I show you how to do things isn't telling you how to do it. There can be multiple ways of accomplishing the same task. In fact, when I work or had worked in the corporate environment with an IT department, as I was a part of that team, when we were sent out to do repairs, we each, as technicians, went about the diagnostic and repair process in our own way. What we had to do was get the end result the company required, meeting their policies and procedures. But how we got there was entirely up to us. So, well, if there was a known issue that kept coming up as a support ticket, and someone in the team had figured out a way to remedy that very quickly, then that information was shared amongst the team and you could adopt it if you wanted to or don't. And so I want you to keep in mind that when I show you things, it's probably going to be different than what the enthusiasts do. And that comes from an evolution of how the technology has changed. But at the same time, it's all kind of the same as it's always been. So I tend to do things in an old school method where I'm not relying on Google, I'm not relying on documentation, I'm relying on figuring it out. And it's just like playing a video game where you have to figure it out. And the difference is when you spend all that time and effort to figure that puzzle out, particularly let's take a game. You pay money for this game. You play it for hours trying to figure it out. Looking at any documentation is typically called a walkthrough or cheating. And then when you're done and you've successfully completed the game, you have no reward other than an emotional feeling. When I do what I'm doing, it's sort of like a video game for me when I have to solve a computer problem. And the reward is I get paid versus me paying people to let me fix their computers. And I see a lot of gaming where people are essentially paying to work, which, you know, is weird to me. Now, that's just, I'm not anti-gaming, don't get me wrong. Gaming's a fun pastime, but too many people, that's all they do. They just game and sleep and eat, and that's all they do. And there needs to be some balance there, in my opinion. So I am not anti-gamer at all. In fact, I started in the 1980s with the arcade games, and then they were expensive, 25 cents a play. If I had $5, I was lucky, and I could get 20 quarters, and I try to make those 20 quarters last until the arcade closed. And then what do I do the next day? Where am I going to come up with another $5? So you had to mow some lawn or do some chore to make $5 so I could go to the arcade. So I wanted to be able to play the games at home. It'd be a lot cheaper, and a home doesn't close. But, well, I would say that was my foray into getting into computers, was to play the games. And the whole time my parents were chastising me that I was wasting my time, I was spending too much time playing the games, and that I really needed to figure out what I was going to do for a living. And it turns out playing the games, getting the games to work, led to fixing the computer in order to play the darn game. And that led me into a computer repair career. And there's a lot of luck in that. I didn't know that was going to happen. I had a hunch computers were going to catch on, and you know, the old folks just didn't get it. And that's before the days of the internet. And not many people had computers, so you had to really figure out on your own. You had to do your own research or your own experimentation, or you knew somebody who knew more than you did, or you thought they knew more than you did. And then you find out the hard way they didn't know what they were talking about, or they do, and then you keep going back to that one person for help when you need it. But then admitting you need the help was sort of like a pride thing, especially for me in the 80s. I wanted the independence to prove I could figure it out on my own. And I did that as a hobby throughout the 1980s until 1991, when I got my first computer repair job or repair position. And yeah, I've been working in the field ever since. So I want to share with you my experience, but I want to reiterate that my experience isn't the end-all be-all of knowledge. It's rather one person's career experience that I'm sharing with you. And if there's any of it you don't like or disagree with, or you think I'm doing things harder, you know, the hard way, that's not wrong. It just means that I'm hopeful that the information I provide you is food for thought, that I'm planting a seed. Any information that helps you, take it. Any information that doesn't help you, leave it. It's likely going to help somebody else. And yeah, and that's basically what I'm going to be doing today, for example, is the folks over at Beelink had sent me this GTR, little mini gaming PC. It's really neat. It's got 4 HDMI outputs on it. And they asked me if I wanted to test a new BIOS update that quiets down the fan, and there was something about the fourth monitor not working correctly. And I said, yeah, absolutely, send me the file, and they emailed me the file. And the way we go about updating this BIOS is a bit different. I did a little Google search just to see what I was getting myself into on this, and there's a website that I found, I think it's in China, and it details this BIOS update, what it does and why it's important. And I've linked to that article in the chat, in the video notes, and then I'm going to share that screen here in a moment so we can read it together. I've not really done any prep for this other than I've turned this on. I started to get any missing Windows updates, which is what it's doing now. I've got my flash drive that's blank and ready to be prepared for the BIOS flash. We'll look and see what version of BIOS we have now. Do know that if you order a GTR, the Beelink GTR6, is it called? Yeah, the GTR6, you will likely have the latest BIOS put on it. So generally speaking, when a new BIOS comes out, it's not to be avoided. If there's enough of a reason for them to release an updated BIOS, it's usually fairly important. However, if your machine's working fine and you've got no complaints and you're not very technically confident, maybe just leave it be. But when it comes to my systems and my customer systems, I always make sure they have the latest BIOS update. And do know that depending on how old your machine is, then that's going to be relative to whether or not there's likely a BIOS update for it. The manufacturers, if they're still making whatever the product is that you have, if like they're still making the GTR6, but now as they make it, they put this new version of BIOS on it right out of the factory. And that's the same with motherboards and everything else. What we don't know when we're buying something is how long the product's been sitting on the shelf. You could be buying the product brand new and it could have arrived from the warehouse last week, or it could have been sitting on the shelf for 6 months before you bought it. So that's a part we don't know. But since the pandemic, inventory levels have been pretty low, and chances are if you're buying a brand new product, it likely has not been sitting on the shelf very long because of the distribution the issues we still have to some extent, as well as some manufacturing issues. So bear that in mind. And also, before we get started, someone sent me a tweet that said that Microsoft is planning to stop selling Windows 10 licenses at the end of this month, the end of January 2023. And I wasn't quite sure about the legitimacy of the article, but then I remembered this is typical for Microsoft. They did the same thing with Windows 8 in Vista and Windows 7, Windows XP. A couple of years, typically about 2 years before support ends, they stop selling licenses. You can always download Windows 10 from Microsoft officially, but Microsoft, after January 31st, according to the article, which again is linked in the video notes, will not be selling any more Windows 10 licenses. This really is not a problem. I've said it before and I'll say it again. There's nothing wrong with Windows 11, but there's no reason to upgrade to Windows 11. If you order a brand new computer like this GTR6, you're going to get Windows 11 on it by default from the factory. The same with most laptops or new desktops. They're going to come from the pre-built manufacturers with Windows 11 typically. You still might be able to find a Windows 10 Pro option, but probably by the end of this year, those will be hard to find, few and far between. So if you get a computer and it's got Windows 11 on it, I can't see any reason why you'd want to downgrade that to Windows 10. There doesn't seem to be any issues with running Windows 11. It's just Microsoft has dressed it up, basically taking Windows 10 and putting a different face on it, but it's still basically Windows 10. And by the same token, if you have Windows 10 currently, I don't see any reason for you to upgrade to Windows 11 because they're essentially the same thing. So if you're going to be building a computer this year in 2023 and you want Windows 10 on it, be prepared that as we move further into 2023, those licenses are going to get harder to find. So when Microsoft stops selling the licenses at the end of this month, there's an existing inventory of probably tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of Windows 10 licenses out there to be sold. Once those are sold, there won't be any more. So you probably have about a year. By this time in 2024, finding a place where you can buy a Windows 10 license might be difficult. So this really only applies to folks building new machines. And if I was building a brand new machine and, we're at 2024, I would be leaning towards Windows 11 because you're going to need to upgrade to Windows 11 in October of 2025 anyway, so why not just get it done and out of the way? They're essentially the same operating system. I can't see any reason why anybody would have a preference over one to the other. So no matter what it is you have, whether you have Windows 10 or you have Windows 11, there's no need to upgrade or downgrade one way or the other, in my opinion. But if that bothers you, if you're just one of those people, I know you're out there, and you have to have Windows 10 because you don't like change and you have whatever your reasoning is, I'm giving you a heads up. This is what's coming so that you don't end up being in a position where, hey, I didn't know. All right, so do with that information what you will. Hello, everybody in blue, all my friends in the chat room, and thank you for joining me this afternoon. Planet Cryos with your $5 super chat. Thank you. He says, this is my early fee. Well, it's better than a late fee. All right. Thank you, Planet Cryos. And let me just take a look in the chat before we get rolling on today's video project here. I see Luke Greenia has joined us. And Flip or Flop, Darren Belmore, John Swisher, Curtis Stollery, Garfield Rupe, Andy Kane, Terry, Nick Poverman, and Essential Working Too Hard, Star Journeyin, and Paul Garrett. Hello to Craig Lilly, Carlos Hernandez, Thomas Mac T, Bob R, Mats Olof, joining us from Sweden, Gil Garcia, there's our friend Rick Lakes, and let's see, who else do we have in here? Bradley Morris, Roy Simone, David Martinez, Sarge Tech, Kcordius Technology, The Greek, Michael Mancini, John Peck, Matthew Burden, David McGurran, Tim Too Much, Daryl Hover, Ken Musetic, William Gordon, Richard Collin. I think I got everybody. I hope I got everybody. Welcome in. Thanks, guys. Thanks for hanging out with me this afternoon. When I received this email from the folks at Beelink asking me if I would check out this BIOS, that it was addressing a loud fan, I never thought the fan on the unit was loud. But admittedly, my hearing is not as good as it used to be, nor is my sight. You'll see me reaching for my glasses. The older I get, the more I have to ask people to repeat themselves, and the more I have to grab my glasses to read smaller print. So even just seeing this chat room text is a little bit difficult for me at the distance that my monitor is. I'm going to work on fixing that. I'll find another solution. But in the meantime, if you see me leaning forward, I'm trying to get a little bit closer to the text. I'm not quite sure how much that actually helps me by moving, a foot closer to the monitor. However, when I fired this up to do the updates, which is what it's doing right now, I did notice the fan was a bit loud. It's quieted down right now, but we're going to go into the BIOS. We'll see what version we have right now. And I'm kind of stalling, waiting for an update to finish. Let's just see how that update's moving along here before we get too much further into this. Let's see, that's going to be my HDMI input right there. Oh, yeah, it looks like it's ready for a reboot. So if I can find my mouse, there we go. We'll let that restart. And let me go back to my main camera here. Bob R. just sent in a $10 super chat. He says, Carrie's the best source on YouTube for tech information and step-by-step detail information. Well, thank you, Bob. I appreciate that. That's what I'm trying to do. Not everybody agrees, and that's okay. Some people don't like certain food. That doesn't mean it's bad for everybody. And for those of you who get what I'm doing here, I appreciate it. I try to treat my videos like a classroom and trying to establish more than just showing you how things are done, but to explain why and answer any questions you have along the way. If I'm not being clear enough, just let me know where you're stuck or misunderstanding, and I'll make a better attempt to explain it in a more digestible way. That helps make me a better teacher, and it helps for you to understand what I'm discussing. I don't want you to just sort of nod your head when you're not getting it, because we build on prior information. So if you don't really get the prior information, the information that follows it may not make much sense or be predictable. Ideally, you will see a pattern emerge of my processes. And once you figure that part out, you'll probably do very well on your own and not require assistance as often, if at all, My goal is to teach a man to fish rather than feed a man a fish, right? You feed a man a fish, you fed him for one day. You teach a man to fish, you fed him for life, or he feeds himself for life. So that's the old school concept that I embrace. And it's, again, it's not everybody's cup of tea, and that's fine. It doesn't have to be. And for those of you who get it, thank you. All right. Let's see. Nick Poverman says Windows 11 is also not playing nice when trying to put computers into Active Directory. Sometimes I have to try more than 3 times for them to show up in Active Directory. So I don't do any server work, and I don't know anything about this. I can't imagine anybody working in corporate IT would glean any useful information from me in the sense of what they do for a living, because the companies that you work for have their own training, their own policies, and their own procedures that are unique to each employer. So when it comes to Windows 11 or even Windows 10 on a server, especially when we talk about things like Active Directory, yeah, not my wheelhouse. However, if it's a known problem, I'm sure it's well documented in places like Reddit. That's lately been a go-to for me versus just looking at random Google results. I appreciate the overall, with Reddit, there's a pretty good policing on removing distraction, removing ads and spam, and people just screwing around, pulling each other's leg, that they're actually just trying to solve a problem and sharing their frustrations. Hey, you know, I have that problem too, or here's what I did to fix my problem. And even people coming back after weeks or months to the same thread with an update of, yeah, I fixed it, and here's what I did. And they do that so that anybody searching for that same resolution in the future could benefit from what they've learned when it took them weeks or months to figure it out. I really appreciate that thoughtfulness of the community, and I appreciate the moderation that Reddit does. So I've been finding myself going there more and more when I'm looking for almost any information regarding anything from car information, home repair, computer repair, all that stuff. Doctor wants me on a certain medication. I want to see what Reddit users are saying that have that medication. I want to hear from the actual people that are using it. There's too many people online, in my opinion, that have an opinion about things based on what they've read or what they've seen, that have zero experience and really don't know what they're talking about. So for me, listening to somebody who has experience is more important and more valuable than listening to somebody who can pass a test but has never done the work. You know, there's book smart and then there's street smart. Ideally, you get a nice balance of both, but I'll take experience any day over academia. So hopefully we get a little blending of both here. There's my friend Ron Hillier joining us. And Sarge Tech says, I have both Windows 10 and Windows 11. 10 for those who don't want to upgrade, 11 for those who have become confused by how it has changed. Yeah, well, again, you get used to it like anything else. I'm a little frustrated with Windows 11 trying to find things I know exist. I just don't know where Microsoft hid them. But after a while, through repetition, it'll all become second nature. Windows 10 was the same way. When I first started using it, I struggled to find some things. And there's probably features in Windows 10 that were added that I just never use because I was just trying to do the same things I was doing in Windows 7, which is trying to do the same things I was doing in XP, you know, all the way back to doing the same things I was doing in DOS. How do I make a directory? How do I copy files? How do I explore the file structure? So for me anyway, that's essentially just wanting to do the common tasks that I always do, copy and paste. Windows 11's kind of changed that interface a little bit, and I find it off-putting. Hitting the start menu to see my installed programs, and they're not there until I hit another button in the start menu. is frustrating. 2 clicks now instead of 1 click. But after a while, once I get used to it, I'll be performing those 2 clicks rapidly, and it won't make much of a difference in my time. But there is a hesitation right now because of my lack of familiarity with the operating system. So it angers me. I get angry that this shouldn't take this long. What I'm trying to do is easy. And if this were Windows 10, I'd already have it done. And of course, the secret is with Windows 11, use the search bar to type in the thing you're looking for rather than hunting around for it manually. Search for finding these things like the disk cleanup tool in Windows 11. Couldn't find it. I'm like, well, I should probably just type disk cleanup in the search. If it's still there, it should pop up. And since it's still just Windows 10, I can't imagine they took it out. But, you know, maybe I should try that now that I'm thinking about it. Because what I like to do, if we go back over to this input here, let's go to finish setting up your device. Okay, that's fine. Skip this. And I don't want to do this. Should be able to cancel this. Skip for now. There we go. Okay. So I was looking to clean up files off the hard drive the other day on a video, and I go to the My Computer icon, I right-click on the C drive, and I go to Properties. And this is how I've done this in Windows 10, Windows 7. And what I'm looking for is the disk cleanup tool, which doesn't seem to exist anymore. This is defragmenting, which we don't do on solid-state drives. Error checking, you don't have to worry about. It's just gone. So it should still be there, and I imagine if I type in disk cleanup, yeah, right there, shows up as an app. And that's what I've been looking for. And I want to clean up system files. Now, Microsoft has moved this. There's probably an icon for it somewhere, but it's not where it used to be. But as you can see, it was no big deal to find it, as long as you know what it's called, right? And then I just tap all these boxes, and that's going to free up almost 2 gigs of wasted space from temp files and thumbnails and all kinds of stuff that we don't need to have. And I don't know, I think it's kind of a pain versus what I used to do in Windows 10. But remember, I've been using Windows 10 for many, many years on a daily basis, and so I'm very familiar with it. Once I familiarize myself with Windows 11 by using it daily, and probably in as little as 2 weeks, I won't even think about it as being a pain anymore. It'll just be that's how it is, and it's not a big deal. So sometimes we use comparison to make ourselves unhappy. As long as we have something to compare it to, then we have a way to gauge happiness or unhappiness simply by the process of comparing one thing to the other and then picking a preference versus just accepting it for what it is and familiarizing yourself with it regardless. So a little philosophical advice there about altering the way we see things. Unless you like, you know, having something to complain about and being upset, but it won't change anything. Microsoft will end Windows 10. It is going away, and you don't have to keep up with the technology if you don't want to. But later, when you decide that you need to catch up, it's going to be even harder for you to catch up the longer you put it off, because more changes over time. So instead of learning a little bit, now you've got to take a bigger leap in learning. It's just not beneficial. People that are still running Windows 7, for example, eventually websites aren't going to load anymore. If they buy a new printer or a scanner, that's not going to have drivers. If you have new tax software, you want to do your taxes, it won't install. So even though you have a working computer, because the operating system is no longer supported, the longer you use it, the more useless it gets, in the way that eventually there'll be no browser support and websites simply aren't going to load. Never mind the security risk for people that say, well, I don't care about my security, I've got nothing for anybody to take. You're still going to run into issues whenever you make a change. And the longer it's obsolete, and you're trying to add something new piece of software, a new, could be antivirus, it could be a new web camera, anything, a USB device you're plugging in, likely isn't going to be supported in Windows 7 with drivers, and you're not going to be able to use it. So ideally, you don't allow yourself to get in that position. And certainly not if you're running a business, because that's a good way to lose your business. But as a home user, which the vast majority of my viewers are home users, it's something to bear in mind. Just because the computer works, this idea that, well, who cares if it's not supported anymore, right? They can't force me to buy a new computer. You may not need a computer. You might just be fine using a phone or a tablet. You might be fine with a Chromebook. But if you're the kind of person that's, you have a printer and you print things out, what's going to happen when that printer breaks and you need to buy a new printer? You buy this new printer, you take it home, you plug it in, and there's no drivers for Windows 7. What are you going to do? Take the printer back? If you want to keep plugging in hardware that's of the same era as the PC, you won't have any problems. So if you want to go buy a 15-year-old printer, if you want to buy or install some 15-year-old software, yeah, it's going to work just fine. The problem is when you take something brand new, hardware or software, and try to force something old to work with it and honestly think it's going to work, you're going to be in for a surprise. So you can be proactive to prevent this situation from occurring, or you can be reactive and just respond when it decides it's time. In other words, you won't have control over that. Something will happen, you'll want to address it. When you go to address it, you're going to learn the hard way. It's not going to take it. And now your expense of whatever it was, like a printer, now you have the added expense of replacing the machine or returning the printer and trying a different one in the hopes that you'll find one that will work in Windows 7. Well, this will happen in Windows 10 eventually. Now, Windows 10 support doesn't end until October 14th of 2025. So there's no worry about end of life on Windows 10 yet. But you'll hear me discuss this a lot more from January 2025 and throughout the rest of the year. This will be a regular topic of reminder for people of what's coming. And then after October 14th of, certainly getting rid of Windows 10 by January of 2026, because then you will have been running an obsolete end-of-life operating system for a few months, which is a massive security concern. And then, of course, what you choose to do is entirely up to you for whatever reasoning you have. But I just want you to have realistic expectations of how much time you can buy yourself. It may be something it won't be within your control. If you don't upgrade it, something will need your attention, something will need to be remedied, and that's when you're going to find out where those limitations start happening. And the longer you go on an operating system after end of life, the more likely that's going to occur. And if you're okay with it, I'm okay with it. I just don't want you to be surprised. These are what you can expect, right? If you stay up with the times and keep your operating system current, you should reasonably expect to be able to install any hardware, webcams, printers, tax software, any other kind of software, and be reasonably secure online. Stick with something old, end of life, and you're trying to mix old hardware with new hardware or new software. They often don't get along very well. Sometimes it's not even possible, and other times it requires a massive investment of time and research to figure out how to make it work. So just set your expectations accordingly, and you should be happy regardless of your decision. Bob R. said, in 2025, I'll be purchasing a new laptop. Edward Kenny says, in Windows 11, disk cleanup can be found by going to Start, All Apps, and Windows Tools. Oh, okay, well, that's good to know. I like the shortcut. I like to go into the properties because I've been doing it for over 10 years, and now Microsoft has apparently taken that away. So to do the same task, I have to go about it in a different way. So I think just typing in the word disk cleanup is much faster than clicking the Start menu and then All Apps and then Windows Tools and then disk cleanup. That's a lot of clicks and drilling down, and I don't know. I'm too impatient for that. But I appreciate that telling me where it's located. Just should be a shortcut to it somewhere. That's all I'm saying. Should be some right click I can do. Patrick Rusaw said DOS had Stacker built in, also known as double space. Stacker sued Microsoft and won, and then Microsoft bought Stacker. Yeah, I've talked about that in the past. That's why there's a DOS 6.2. That's where it had Stacker. 6.21, that's when Microsoft had to remove Stacker. And then DOS 6.22, which was the last version of DOS, that Microsoft had bought Stacker and put it back in. Good old days, yeah. William Lynn says, what about StorageCent? It has the temp file cleaner as well. Well, William, I've talked about this before, and I encourage you to run your own test, but essentially, when you run disk cleanup using, let me rephrase, when you run StorageSense, and I encourage you, do it now. When it's done, then run disk cleanup. In theory, they should both do the same job, but what you're going to find is the StorageSense leaves most of the files, the vast majority of files that disk cleanup cleans, about 80% of those are not cleaned up by StorageSense. They are not the same tool. So if you run StorageSense and then run disk cleanup, look at the difference. In fact, what you can do is you can run disk cleanup and get an estimate for how much space, like if you follow what I just did, it kind of gives you an estimate of how much space is going to be freed. Then cancel it. Don't actually do anything. Then run StorageSense. Then run disk cleanup again and see how much space it's going to clean now. And you'll see that StorageSense maybe takes 20%, whereas disk cleanup is much more thorough. So I use them both. I don't like that I can't see what StorageSense is removing. I have no idea how much space it just cleared. So that would be one way to tell. So I run them both. I think if I did it the other way around, I think if I ran disk cleanup first, StorageSense wouldn't really have anything to do. I'm hoping Microsoft improves StorageSense so that it does the full complete cleanup that disk cleanup does. And that's probably why both options still exist in Windows 10 and 11 today. That would be my guess. Scotto says, a good example of this is trying to explain to grandma why her sewing machine programs don't work anymore. Oh yeah. Yeah, there are people that have, for those of you who don't know, they have like embroidery machines. And the embroidery machines are programmed using data files for the patterns. And essentially you put it on a flash drive. It's through the software, you can design your own pattern, the colors of threads you're going to use, et cetera, et cetera. You put that on a flash drive, you plug it into the, you plug the flash drive into the embroidery machine, it reads the file, and you set your fabric on there. It tells you what color of thread to put into the spool, and it starts its embroidery using whatever color thread it needs at that time, and then a little screen pops up on the sewing machine. It tells you change the thread to this color, and then push a button when you're ready, so you change the color. And then it continues the embroidery, and it's just all automated. So the thing that you're embroidering is perfect. It's very professional looking. And yes, when you change the operating system, that embroidery software often breaks and isn't necessarily kept up to date by the manufacturer like they should. But I have personally been through that. I've got a couple clients that do embroidery as their business. And yeah, you're bringing back some memories there. And as far as I know, they still do it today. But trying to help them was difficult because I don't do that for a living. And the manufacturer of the embroidery machine has a process that they use, and I'm not familiar with it. So in most cases, you know, while I can fix computer problems, I can't necessarily fix their sewing machine problems, and they have to reach out to the manufacturer, and they may be required to buy a new piece of software. I don't know, but just an example of being a field service technician of some of the different ways people use their computers, and by not upgrading or staying up to date, how that can lead to problems down the road that results in a support call. And it's what's kept me in business, right, since 1991. Nick Poverman said his mother uses one that works off a floppy disk. Yeah, well, there's going to come a time where you're not going to be able to find floppy disks anymore. So, you know, again, she could be proactive and deal with this before she's forced to, or be reactive, where whatever it was she was planning to do is going to get interrupted because she won't be able to do that task until this particular issue that is bound to happen comes up where she can't use the machine. And then at that point, she doesn't have a choice, right? She will have to either not do any more sewing of like that nature, that kind, or deal with the upgrade before she can move forward. My personal preference is for me to schedule the budget, you know, the money and the time, so it doesn't interfere with my plans where I need to get something done. And Murphy's Law says that's when the worst thing will happen, is at the worst possible time. And then I'm forced to deal with it when I didn't really plan my day around that. I may not have had money saved up for this, but now I don't have a choice anymore. So it's always my preference to be proactive, to schedule it so it doesn't interrupt my life and it doesn't cost me an arm and a leg. Dennis Kine has been a member for 1 month. He says, hello, Carrie and everyone else. Hey, Dennis, thanks for joining our tech club here. All right, let me switch back over now and let's get into what we're going to do here today. Here we go. I'm going to close this out. Now, a couple of things. I've copied over the BIOS files and this program CPU-Z. And when I bring up CPU-Z, we can see what version of BIOS we have right now. By going onto the motherboard tab here. And it looks like this is our version, this code right here. But more importantly, we pay attention to the date. So this is November, what is that, November 8th, 2022. So the BIOS isn't that old, but then this computer isn't that old either. It's a fairly new design. So I'm assuming the BIOS they sent me is newer than this. And they did check it based on the serial number. They know which BIOS version from the factory was installed on the motherboard based on the serial number. So I just wanted that for my own reference. That looks like it says, I got to move up a little closer to it, P5C4 version 16 or 1.6, I'm not quite sure. We could probably go into the BIOS and see the version in there as well. Now, when it comes to how to flash the BIOS, this is a bit different. Let's start by going into the BIOS first. Let's go to Settings and Windows Update. I'm going to go to, well, they don't put it in Windows Update anymore. Where's my troubleshooting and recovery at? Well, I suppose, go back here, recovery, restart this PC. Oh, that's reset. I don't want to reset it. My bad. Advanced startup is what I want. Hit restart now. And it should come up with a menu here, I think. The no signal means the computer is not sending a video signal out anymore. It may actually be rebooting right now. I was expecting a, yeah, it is rebooting. I was expecting a menu to pop up here. I just loaded, hit delete and F2. One of those got me into the BIOS. And we can see here in the BIOS, where I can't use the mouse, we can see the build date and time appears to be the BIOS version. Below that, you will see the EC version, and I'm expecting both the build date and time to change, and I think the EC version will change. Now, you notice there doesn't seem to be any option in the BIOS like we have with the big motherboard manufacturers like ASUS and MSI and Gigabyte and ASRock, where the option to flash the BIOS is in the BIOS itself. It doesn't appear that this is an option that this manufacturer provides. So we have to go about updating the BIOS in a different way for this reason. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to discard any changes and we'll reboot it. And then let me switch back over to camera 1. Once again, just bear with me please for a moment as I'm fidgeting around here with my inputs. And what we want to look at is what the process is, since it's my experience plays no role here because this is a very different way of updating a BIOS. It's kind of reminiscent to the way we used to do it in the 90s. But let me show you the page that I stumbled on here that explains the process. Okay, so this is, you can download the Beelink GTR6 BIOS update to enable silent fan or fourth HDMI port. So I'm not sure what the HDMI port issue was. This does have 4 HDMI ports on the back of it. I just assumed they all work, but they've got a link here talking more about the GTR6. Somebody has taken a picture of the screen. This website is, what does that say? CGR, China Gadgets Review. China Gadget Reviews. My mouse has stopped responding for some reason. Oh, no, my mouse is not on that computer yet. All right, let me scroll down here and see what it says. New BIOS update. BIOS update process. Download the BIOS file with 4th HDMI active from here, or for super silent fan from here. So apparently they sent me the one for the super silent fan. I don't know why there'd be a separate one. You'd think these two would be combined. So it downloads an RAR file. I use 7-zip to extract it. It says you need to format a flash drive as FAT32 file system, and then copy the uncompressed files to the root of the USB, and then restart the Beelink GTR6 while pressing F7. And in the boot menu, select the USB drive. The update process will start and a text will appear. Wait about 2 to 3 minutes for it to finish. When it reaches the end, press the power button and restart normally. Now, what's interesting to me is, how is this going to boot? It's not telling us to make a bootable flash drive. It's just saying to copy the files on a freshly formatted flash drive that's FAT32. Now, FAT32 has a limitation of I can't remember what the limitation was. If you have a flash drive that's too big, you may not be able to format it in FAT32. It may not be an option because the folder, the drive capacity, that's the word, goes beyond what FAT32 is capable of. So you definitely want to use a smaller flash drive. I would say, I would recommend 8 gigs or smaller. You should be able to use 16 gigs, but really, if you had a 1 gig flash drive, it's way more than you need. So smaller is better. Older flash drives are better because the older drives are going to be smaller in capacity. they're slower in performance, but you're dealing with a small BIOS file here. So let me go back over to, let's see, let's go back over to the Beelink computer here. Oh, now it brought up the troubleshooting menu. Interesting. Okay. I'm going to just back this out. I don't want to do this anymore. Exit and continue to Windows 11. Okay. Now, fan is making a little bit of noise there, and it's just going to restart. And then once it restarts, we're going to take the files that are in that folder that I copied over with the BIOS updates that I've already extracted. The drive is already formatted. I like to keep my BIOS flash drive free and empty at all times. That way I don't have many BIOSes to select from and accidentally pick the wrong one. So when I'm done flashing a BIOS with the flash drive, I erase the flash drive or delete the files from it. So this flash drive should be empty and ready to program, and I believe it's already in FAT32, but let's just plug it in and we'll check that. So I'm going to step around to the back of the unit, find an empty USB port. Doesn't matter which USB port we use. And let's see, it's blank, but is it FAT32? How do we know? We go to Properties by right-clicking on it. And right here, file system is FAT32, so that's good. And it is the default on smaller size flash drives. Right here is the BIOS directory, and we want all these files. There is a PDF file that's the official instructions from the company, and I'm going to just ignore that for now. Now, because of the UEFI BIOS, it may be that we don't have to create a bootable format. It may be that there's like this EFI directory that is somehow defaulted in UEFI BIOSes that make the flash drive, for lack of a better word, bootable. So let's try this, as they say, to restart, and we'll press F7. All I've done is copy the files, all right? I didn't make the flash drive bootable. That's what I'm finding very strange. So we're gonna go over to the power button here. We're gonna select restart. And then when the machine shows me the Beelink logo, or just before it shows, you get a feeling for how long it takes. Like right now, the screen went blank. I start pressing F7 repeatedly on the keyboard. And hopefully we get a boot menu, and we do. And there it is, UEFI. This is the USB flash drive right here. I push enter. Let's see what it does. Oh my goodness, the video is really faded. Whoa, that is freaky looking. So the text is very difficult to see, but yeah, this is working somehow. It sees what it needs off of the flash drive, and without asking me, to continue or verifying anything with me, it just runs. That's pretty unusual. Usually there's a confirmation page that says, here's the BIOS you have now, here's the BIOS you're putting in. Do you wish to continue? Please do not turn off the power or anything during the process. So the question now is, was it that quick? Did it finish that quick? Because it does say you have to turn the computer off when it's done. It doesn't prompt you like we're accustomed to seeing from other manufacturers. Now I'm looking at the light on the flash drive, and it's no longer blinking. In fact, if we go back to camera 1 here, so you can see me, the light is steady, meaning it's no longer reading or writing any information. I'm guessing it's done, but that's a relatively small BIOS if it's that quick. And I'm going to go ahead and hold the power button in. Tell you what, let's put me up in the corner here. Right about there. And yeah, I'm going to go ahead and hold the power. I take it back. The machine is off. I'm looking and the light's off, and I don't hear the fan running anymore. So what I'm going to do, I don't want this machine booting off of this flash drive anymore. So we'll take that out. Now I'm going to turn it back on, because that's what it did. It just completely shut itself off. So there's no doubt it's done. And now we'll let it boot up, and we'll check our BIOS version, and we'll see if it's changed. That was pretty easy. Different though, very different, but easy. Let's see, I want to go to the HDMI input. We will run CPU-Z again and take a look at our BIOS version now. And let's see what it says. What's interesting is it looks like we have a date of 11/8/2022, and it's showing P5C4V16. I should have wrote down what it said before. Do you guys remember what it said before? That date, though, doesn't look like it's changed. So I'm a little concerned if we have actually updated the BIOS or not here, or if we already had the latest version. I would think this would be a January. This would have a 23 at the end of it here. And I also don't know if they're doing day, month, year, or month, day, year. This could be August 11th, or this could be November 8th. It's United States, we do month, day, year, but a lot of other countries do day, month, day, month, and year. So in any event, I'm not quite sure. It doesn't really look any different though. Let me look back at the BIOS files again to see if it says what version we were installing. Oh, this is the EC version 64001. And we saw that in the BIOS. So let's go back in the BIOS and see what the BIOS settings say. So again, I will restart. And as it restarts, I will hit the delete key. I think it's delete that gets me in the BIOS. Yes, delete got me into the BIOS. And we can see the EC number now is 6400.11. I'm trying to remember what it said before. I really should have wrote it down. I think that is what got upgraded here. Here's information on our solid state drive. Of course, this had no effect on that. I don't know if there's any settings here for the fans. It looks like maybe they're just changing the fan curve on it. And I was just thinking, why can't you just go into the BIOS and change it yourself? But it just may be that the manufacturer has set it so you can't play with it. You see a lot of pre-builts do that, like Dell and HP. It's very common on pre-builts that the BIOSes aren't as configurable. And if you're somebody who likes that, you're better off building your own machine, but you're probably not going to be able to build one this tiny. And laptops are very similar too. So yeah, let's just save and exit that, get out of that. We'll come back over here. And let's see, maybe somebody in the chat room remembers what it says. Paul says, I think it was just a patch, Carrie. Yeah, I think you're right. I think it was just updating the that EC firmware, which is the embedded controller, EC. Leslie Cavins joins us in the chat and says hello. Hey, welcome in, Leslie and Steve Mercure. Guizens in the chat says Windows 10 and 11 can read FAT32 on a USB drive up to 8 terabytes. Windows can't format it if you have something like Rufus. Oh, all right. So, but it's not a Windows 10 or 11 limitation. It's a file allocation table 32 limitation. FAT32 has a mathematical limitation based on the math involved for that file system. And the same is true with NTFS. There's limits. And I just forgot what the limit on FAT32 was, but by today's standard, it's a pretty small limit. But back in the 1980s, 1990s, I guess it was the 90s? Or was it even the late 80s when they introduced FAT32, which was way more efficient than FAT16. But NTFS is 10 times more efficient, or more, depending on the size of the drive. Because we deal with cluster size and unshared clusters and slack space, and I won't get into it. I've talked about it in other quick tips videos, but it results in filling up your drive before it's full, because if you have a lot of small files and files can't share one cluster, and the minimum amount of space any file takes is one cluster, without being able to share that cluster with any other file, you could end up losing 50% of your hard drive space if you have a lot of tiny files that are each consuming one cluster and there's no sharing of the cluster. So NTFS resolves that, as well as makes the clusters smaller. So anyway, what happened with FAT16 and FAT32 is the bigger the drive was, the bigger the clusters were. And so it resulted in a lot of confusion when people said, you know, I'm looking at how much data I've got, and it's far less than the capacity of the drive, but the drive says it's out of space or running out of space. How does that make any sense? So that was fun to explain to people. Let's see. What about exFAT? A lot of BIOSes will not recognize an exFAT partition. The benefit of exFAT is the ability to move data from a Windows to a Mac PC via USB. If you don't intermingle your flash drives with anything other than Windows, but if you are moving data back and forth from Mac to PC, you definitely want exFAT. Otherwise, you might find a lot of things don't read exFAT, and you'll wonder why the flash drive isn't working on some devices, but it is working on others. So I tend to either stick with NTFS if it's a flash drive over 16 gigs or bigger, and then I'll use FAT32 for anything smaller. I almost never use exFAT. Although exFAT's very efficient, I don't like the lack of compatibility with it. Matt Power says hello. There's Stan Ristov. Welcome in, guys. Stan says, that's an ugly BIOS. It reminds me of 1996. Yeah, well, how often you going in there, you know? Bill Thomas says, hey, Kerry, when you coming back to Michigan and opening a studio? Well, I was in the process of doing just that. And what ended up happening is we were about 3 days from closing on what would be the new studio, and it kind of got yanked out from under my feet. I was very surprised, blindsided by the actions of the selling agent. So I'm back at square one again, starting all over, searching for a place. And my time here in Studio B is coming to an end. And so now, instead of trying to push forward and forcing a place in Michigan, which, you know, now, again, proactive or reactive, I'm going to be at a point where if I do not have a place in Michigan and I can't stay in Studio B, I'm going to be stuck. So I'm in negotiations with the owners of Studio B to see if I can buy it. And if I can't buy it, maybe we can put a lease in place. So I have a sort of a contract that buys me another year or two. So that's kind of what we're looking at right now. If I end up buying Studio B, then I have to stay in it for 2 years. Or there's capital gains tax and things that I'd have to pay. So if that happens, I will be stuck here for 2 years. In the meantime, I'm not seeing much being offered in the area of Michigan that I'm looking, and the prices are still a little inflated. They're coming down, and I'm starting to see homes listed for a long time, like over a month, whereas throughout 2020, 2021, 2022, it was just houses were selling about as fast as they were being listed. They were selling. They're getting more than they're asking for, sometimes all cash deals. I can't compete with that. I'm not going to make a $500,000 decision on a house 2,000 miles away that I can't physically walk through. So it's just not enough time. And because my time here is running out, I've got to buy more time, is what it amounts to. So, but I'm still getting MLS listings of properties available in Michigan as they become available, and there's maybe 2 properties a week, and they're not meeting my requirements. Found a really nice property that is going to be listed soon. Real estate agent was giving me a heads up. And it's beautiful. It's in a nice secluded area. It's on 7 1/4 acres. It has high-speed internet, but it doesn't have a basement. The river runs right through the backyard. It's beautiful. But without a basement, between the studio and my computer repair business, I can consume 3/4 of that 1,800 square foot house. My preference is to have a basement that's likely about the same size square footage as the first floor, and let my computer business and studio be in the basement. And then the first floor will be just like a normal house. So this property didn't have a basement. And I thought, initially when I looked at it, I thought it was very promising. But then realizing it was 1,800 square feet with no basement and no second floor, it's overpriced, in my opinion. And then when you're on the bank of a river like that, you need flood insurance, which is adding an expense that'll never go away. And then when you get that 100-year flood and it comes up to the house and ruins your yard, you'll have to pay and deal with that. So I don't necessarily want a place on the river, but if it had a basement and it was at the asking price, I could make it work. So it's like we're falling short one way or the other. Either the house is too small, the house is way too far out in the sticks, it's too long of a drive to get into town, or the house is in the sticks and it's close to town, but it doesn't have any high-speed internet. Like we keep going around in circles. Well, this property has 2 of the 3 things you want. This property has 2 of the 3 things you want. Well, if we could take the 2 things I want here and overlap it with the things that are missing from over here, we'd have the perfect place. And then you got to deal with the asking price, right? So because I'm already here at Studio B, it's just easier for me to stay if I can make that work. And so we're negotiating, and I'll keep you up to date on how that progresses. Sarge Tech said, I'm fortunate. I live in the sticks and I still have high-speed internet. Yeah, well, look, everybody's going to have high-speed internet eventually. But yeah, for some of these places that have been in the sticks for, since the 60s or whatever, they're usually the last ones to get the infrastructure redone, because effectively they have to trench cables and stuff. And it's typically done by default on all new homes, as they're running the plumbing, the electrical, then the internet provider, typically the cable company, will run their lines at the same time. So the infrastructure's there pretty much on new properties. Ryzen B says, we just sold a rental 1,300 square foot house in Ferndale next to Oak Park for over $200,000. I'm not surprised. Ferndale's become a very sort of hipster place. It's changed a lot since I lived there. But with Ferndale being right next to Oak Park, I used to ride my bike there. It was like a 10-minute bike ride, if that, to get into Ferndale. And there's a lot of businesses, restaurants. There was a record store, all kinds of stuff happening in Ferndale, and then Berkeley's right there too. But it's a nice area, and I think that price is pretty reasonable, quite honestly. But I don't want to be next to Detroit. I'm looking at the other side of Michigan. I'm looking in the Grand Rapids area. Chris Garrett said, I live in the sticks as well, and I have high speed. Used to my area was last on the list. Early 80s, we were still using party lines. Yeah, I'm not surprised. Shamim in the chat says, Kerry, what do you think about the idea of upgrading the PC case? Do you think it's not a problem to upgrade to a cooler case, or is it logical? And greetings from Sweden. Well, thank you for the question, and it's really cool. And we have a couple of viewers joining us from Sweden right now. Upgrading a computer case is, in my opinion, a luxury. It's sort of like ordering dessert. We have to eat to stay alive, but we don't need to have a meal after our meal. That is typically not healthy in most cases, right? It's going to be very sugary or very salty or have a lot of fat. It's a treat, like after you eat, have some more food. But the main meal obviously being ideally something your body needs with proteins and things of that nature. So when it comes to a computer case, the computer case's job is simply to hold your parts. As long as it's doing its job, why would you ever want to replace it? Now, I could understand if the case you have doesn't have much room for expansion. You want to add a bunch of internal hard drives or more solid state drives. Or maybe the case is too short to put in a full-size graphics card. In which case, yeah, you don't have much of a choice but then to order a different case or to just start all over with a new build. But at the end of the day, I can't speak for what makes sense for you. If that's something you want to do, even if you don't have a good reason, like even if there's nothing you want to add to your computer, there's no graphics card you want to put in, there's no more storage devices you want to put in, you just feel like you want a new case, you want something to do, maybe you're bored, maybe the case you're looking at isn't much money for you and the amount of money you make, and you would enjoy the process, have at it. I don't think there's a right or wrong, but I would say that overall, you'd be best, in my opinion, to get the case you want when you're building the computer so you don't have this scenario. And then what do you do with the old case? Good luck selling it. It won't be worth much. It'll likely end up in a recycle bin or a trash bin just to get it out of the house. So as a hobby for something to do, it might make sense. On the other hand, if you're taking a perfectly good computer and you're disassembling it because you simply want it in a new case, and in doing so you damage something, you know, you might be in a position where you're buying a new motherboard or whatever part got damaged in that. So there is a little risk involved depending on your technical competency. And it may not be a big deal for you if you were to damage something. It gives you more to do. So really that's a decision only you can make if it makes sense to you. Nick Poverman wants to know how long before RGB dies. He says, not soon enough if you ask me. I'm so sick of rainbow and unicorn throw up on computers. Yeah, I don't know. RGB, I think we got another 10 years of it before it sort of becomes out of fashion. I think that, I'll tell you what, let me go full screen again here on camera one. I think that if we end up being in a recession, if folks aren't making enough money to buy anything more than what they need, we've been spoiled the last couple of years. And that stimulus money, it was free money, right? For a lot of people. Now we're going to pay the price for that, likely this year, where we're going to be in a position where people aren't buying as many goods. So then the manufacturing jobs won't need to hire as many people. They might let some people go. It creates kind of this downward spiral. And we go through these cycles. I've been through them in the 70s. We had the energy crisis. In the 80s, we had the recession. This just happens. It's just up and down, up and down. So it won't stay that way forever. But why I'm mentioning it is I think that given the added profit margin that RGB puts onto the value of a computer hardware piece, like a case or a motherboard, if people are just having a hard time making ends meet and they need a computer, then RGB won't even be considered. It's a luxury item. And if you can barely rub two pennies together to get a board, you certainly aren't going to even consider the added cost of RGB. So RGB is an unnecessary luxury indulgence. And if times get tough financially, you'll see RGB start to sort of fade away until the economy gets better. And then after that, it's just a question of when it stops becoming fashionable, when it becomes ostentatious, and it's like flexing. When people start sort of shaming people who do that, it'll be uncool, to have that stuff. And that's the way of fashion, and that's the way of, look at appliances, like an oven in the 1970s. They like to use that lime green color and a lot of light browns. And it just falls out of fashion. It just looks ugly. You're like, I got to get rid of that mustard colored oven. Don't want to look at it anymore. So everything's currently like black or stainless steel, which I think will be more timeless in regards to looking old. But who knows what the future holds. I'm with you on it, though. I could do without the RGB stuff. This RGB is just there because I have a channel and I broadcast. You think I have this on my personal office computer? No. Gary Tatum says, I think the home desktop is going the way of the minis in the future, as powerful as they're getting. I don't think so. I'd like for that to happen, but I don't think so. Dell and HP in particular are selling about 300 million computers every year worldwide. The mini PCs aren't selling a fraction of 1% of that. So we're a long, long way from it. And home users have different needs. Some home users like to tinker around and add stuff, and you're not going to do that on a mini PC. Some users want the ability to upgrade things. You're not going to be able to do much more than upgrading the RAM or the storage on a mini PC. So, yeah. And I think the mini PCs will generally cost more for the same hardware as what you could get in a desktop pre-built. And generally speaking, consumers go to what's cheapest, not to what makes the most sense. Back in the late 1800s, you could buy a steam-powered car, you could buy an electric car, or you could buy a smelly, noisy gasoline-powered car. Obviously, the gasoline-powered car won out because it was cheaper. In the 80s, when we had the battle between VHS and Beta, some argue that Beta was the superior offering, but it didn't have the same licensing fees, where VHS was very cheap royalties. So as a result, more companies manufactured VHS players because it was cheaper on the royalty side of things. Then because there were so many manufacturers making VCRs, VHS VCRs, that created a competition where the prices got lower and lower and lower. So as a consumer looking to buy a VCR in the 1980s, overall, the consumers bought the cheaper one. If Beta, which was created by Sony, if they weren't so greedy, they could have very easily been the leader in that space of video cassette recording or video cassettes in general. Consumers will almost always go to the cheaper option. And it's not because of any other reason, and not because it makes more sense because it's smaller, or, you know, in the case of the mini PC, it's out of the way, but rather that it's just cheaper. So the only way I can see these mini PCs overtaking regular desktop PCs is they've got to get the price point cheaper. But currently the price point it's kind of equivalent, depends on the model. In many cases it can be more expensive because it just costs more. There's more engineering and custom-made parts to get them into this compact size, and that makes them very difficult to repair, if not impossible, and very, very limited upgrade options, just like a laptop. So, yeah. Andy says you have no RAM mids with RGB on your personal PC. No. Let me think about that. I have multiple personal PCs, but the computer I'm referring to is the office computer at Studio A. It's just in a 200R, and there's no RGB on it, pretty sure. I mean, the cover's covering it up anyway on the 200R. So I'm pretty sure I didn't waste my money on RGB that I can't see. And it does cost more. So yeah, I'm pretty confident about that. But I do have a couple of computers I consider mine, like the Nuka-Cola case that has the 8086K limited edition processor in it. And it's a glass panel. That one has the RGB RAM in it. The Xenos build has RGB RAM in it. The Robot's Foot has RGB RAM in it. But these are showpieces, right? The actual business machines I use, there's no RGB on them. I don't think. Some of the boards have a little RGB on the board. I know when I was using the MSI board for a while, but again, in the Corsair 200R, once you put the cover on, the side panel, you can't see it anyway. So that's why I'm not real sure. I'd have to go back in my video library here where I'm building it so I could see what I used. But putting RGB in it would have been a waste of money since you can't see it. Nick Poverman says, I'm never putting RGB on my personal computer. I'd rather put the money to better parts that make it rather than making it a Christmas tree. I agree. Yeah, you're much better off buying a larger or faster storage drive, bigger, faster RAM modules, upgrade the video card, upgrade the cooler. Oh, I agree with you 100%. There's much better ways to spend your money where you're actually going to get a return on the investment more than just lights. If you just want to add lights to your computer, you can go buy a lava lamp. You can buy a light bright and just get some magnets and hang the light bright on the side of the computer for 15 bucks, and then use the little pegs to make your own little design, and $15, it's done. No reason to have that built into the RAM or built into the board or do all the cable management with all the fans and synchronize all of it. Ugh. You know, setting that up, it's hard to make a decision of how I wanted to set it up. I'm cycling through all the options on the RAM. I'm cycling through the options on the RGB power connector. I'm cycling through the options on the little LCD screen on the cooler. What a waste of hours. Because it's like, hey, this one's nice. Oh, this one's nice too. Well, you know, you can just whittle away your time going through all the options and trying to make a decision what color you want, what pattern you want for each device that lights up. And then figuring out how to synchronize them so they work together, if that's even possible, depending on what compatibility they have and how well you did your research before you bought your parts. So yeah, that is a massive time suck. And I get mad at myself when I get caught up in it. Like, oh, let me do this. And you know, the next thing you know, 90 minutes has gone by and I haven't made up my mind. So stupid. What motherboard am I using? Well, once again, it depends on which system we're talking about. Studio A computer is using a Gigabyte, is it a 590? 690? I can't remember. I think when people ask me these questions, you're not really considering how many motherboards go in and out of here on a weekly basis. It's not uncommon for me to work on 200 or more computers every year. And everything kind of blends together. I can't remember from one machine to another. I imagine most people watching me from home know exactly what their computer is, and they just have the one, maybe they have two, and that's all they have, and it rarely ever changes. It's very easy to know exactly what's in your machine. But I have a streaming machine here, as well as a backup streaming machine. I have a streaming machine, the original Threadripper build over at Studio A, along with the Office PC, along with the Nuka-Cola build, along with the little mini ITX system, along with, there's more than I'm even having trouble remembering how many computers I have. So then to specifically ask me which components one has versus the other, I can't remember. We'd have to go back and look at the videos and see what I built. Scott Hallinan says, hey, Carrie, I just got home from work and switched the TV on. What's in the box with 8.8 on it? This is the box this little computer came in. This is the Beelink. It's 8 cores and supports 8K video output. And in this box, if you watch the unboxing I did of the GTR6 last month, that's got our power adapter, power cable, HDMI cables, the little bracket to mount it on the back of a monitor if you wanted this off the desk and hidden away. Yeah, it's all shipped in this little tiny box right here. And if you're interested in buying one of these, I have a link that'll take you over to Amazon. And if you use my link, I make a small commission from your purchase. I don't know who you are. I can see what was purchased using my link, when it was purchased, but not to who or where. So I don't know what state you live in. I don't know what your name is. I just know that Amazon tells me these sales were generated using your link, so you know how much commission you can expect, right? So it's all anonymous. It's a nice way to support the channel anonymously, and it doesn't cost you anything extra. It's all the same. So anytime you want to make a purchase from Amazon of anything, just using any of my Amazon links to take you to Amazon and then search while you're in Amazon for the things you want to buy, because my link took you to Amazon, any purchase you make, I get a commission off of the sale. And it's a small commission, but if enough of you do it, believe me, it adds up. And I certainly appreciate it. There's no way for me to know who's made the purchase. So, as far as privacy goes, you're not exposing anything. You're not paying any different. So it's just a nice way to support the channel for stuff you were going to buy anyway. Mark Gaines says, I have 2 computers and I can't remember what's in either of them. Imagine going through hundreds year after year after year after year for over 30 years. Yeah. And I think it was easier for me when I was younger because life didn't get so full of distraction. But as we get older and we take on more and more responsibilities, I can't devote as much of my brain to storing that information. I'm just not capable of it, and it's not getting easier. So yeah, I have to go and physically check. And after I check it, ask me an hour later what it was, I probably won't remember. I've already moved on to the next thing. Jim KJ3N in the chat says, not counting tablets and laptops, I have 8 computers in the house. All right. YD Boss says, can I buy anything from Amazon using your link so you get a commission? Yes. Yeah, if my link, like in the video notes below this video, there's a link that takes you to the product page on Amazon for the Beelink GTR6 that we're looking at today. So let's say you click on that link, takes you to Amazon, takes you to the GTR6 page. And then while you're in Amazon, while that browser is open, you type into the search something else you want to buy. Anything. From toilet paper to books. Because my link is what brought you to Amazon, any purchase you make at Amazon, I get a commission for because you used my link to take you there, right? It's like I've escorted you in. So because I did that, Amazon credits me with making that sale possible, for me generating a sale for them. So yeah, so any normal purchases you're making in Amazon, just click on any of my Amazon links to take you to Amazon, and then just go about your normal Amazon visit, check out, and I make 1 or 2% of the price as commission in most cases. Steve wants to know if there's a link to the keyboard I'm using. If you look in my videos on YouTube, you'll find there's a video review of the keyboard, or of several keyboards, and this is in there. I should probably add a link to this keyboard and mouse as a permanent thing, because it's being shown to viewers that have never seen my videos before, have no idea that I did a review on this, and want to know where they can buy one. And I've learned that anytime I have anything behind me on display, people want to know, where do I buy that thing, even though it has nothing to do with the subject of the video. So I should make that a permanent part of the show notes. But just so you know, this is a $200 keyboard. It's not cheap, and there's no mouse included. So once you hear that, you may not be interested in buying it. Andy Kane says you escorted us to the Amazon VIP lounge. Well, somehow that sounds immoral, but that shows you where my mind is at. Patrick Rusaw has provided the link to my Amazon shop. Yeah, and if you use that link, and once again, use Amazon search as you normally would to find the products you want. If it's my link that takes you to Amazon, in that browser session, if you close the browser and reopen it again and just go to Amazon, I won't make the commission. The link has to take you to Amazon. And then whatever happens at Amazon, I'll make a commission on. Small commission, but it adds up. And again, it doesn't change your price or shipping, or it doesn't change anything for you. Star Journeying says, I have 3 computers and 1 tablet. That's enough to try to remember what's what. Sure. Steve Mercure says, you made a video out of making my computer and I don't remember what was in it. However, thanks to your video library, I can look it up. Yeah, exactly. Well, this thing sounds like it's off. So it's clear to me that their BIOS update has in fact quieted the fan down, because I can't hear the fan at all. I wonder if it's even spinning. Maybe the computer's gone to sleep. Let me switch back over to the HDMI input and see if we have video. Yeah, we're still running. The fan is, sounds like the fan is off, quite frankly. It is whisper quiet. I mean, I can't hear it at all. If the power light wasn't on, or if I wasn't seeing the video, I wouldn't even have known it was on. So that's interesting. But that's a relatively short video for today, just showing this unique BIOS update process. If you get a GTR6 today, as I mentioned, it should already have the latest BIOS on it, unless it was sitting on a shelf for some time. If you register the device with the folks at Beelink, then you could be alerted to when BIOS updates are available. They handle them in a different way. The website's very limited with regards to how they're distributing files and how you can look up files. It's much lower budget than you're going to see from the big motherboard manufacturers. So as a result, they go about it a different way. What do you think about GPUs getting bigger and bigger? YD Boss wants to know. It doesn't really matter to me. I mean, what difference does it make? The bigger concern is what they're charging. I don't care how big or how small it is. Here's the performance and here's how much it costs. The size of it doesn't really matter to me one way or the other. Concordia's Technology wants to know, can you save the link to favorites or bookmarks? Would that work to give you credit? Yeah, you could put an Amazon shortcut on your desktop. That's basically my link. And so every time you go to Amazon, if you click on that or a bookmark, if it's my link you're bookmarking, yeah, absolutely. Then I would get a commission every time you go to Amazon. Thank you for asking. Matt Power wants to know if that $200 keyboard came with a kiss. It did, but I told the guy no thank you. His beard was scratchy. Mark Gain says, it's a pity your links do not work in the UK because I use Amazon a lot. There is a way for me to generate links for other purchases from Amazon in other countries. I just haven't had time to set it up, and unfortunately, I don't think it's going to generate much in the way of sales commission for me because it's only like 1 or 2%. So you know, you've got to move 40 to, I would say, anywhere from $40,000 upwards to $100,000 for that commission to actually be something where your eyes get, oh, hey, that's pretty good. So reaching $40,000 in sales every month, that's quite an accomplishment. I'm not quite sure I'm pulling that much business to Amazon, although it adds up over the course of a full year, but it's all rated month by month. And like I said, it adds up, and I appreciate the thought, and I am going to look into expanding the links into other countries. I just haven't had time. And Patrick Rousseau, again, has the link there for the Amazon shop, which you could turn into a desktop shortcut or add it to your bookmarks. I appreciate it. Pat Johnson wants to know, would you check HDMI 4 to see if it'll work? Well, the problem I have with testing the HDMI ports is they auto-sense when you plug in, right? So in theory, all of the 4 HDMI ports should have always worked regardless. The question is when you're using them simultaneously, that when you go to use the 4th one, apparently there's a BIOS update for that, which I don't quite understand. But if I, for example, let's just test my theory out here. Let me put myself back in a corner again so you can watch what I'm doing and see the result. If I step around, on the back here, we have 2 HDMI ports here and 2 here. So if we call this one on the top left HDMI 1, and I pull this out and plug it in the one below, it should auto-sense and bring our desktop back up here, which it did. Now if I take it out of here and plug it into the top right, so unplug it, we're going to go into the top right. Now that one should auto-sense and the desktop should reappear. If I unplug it from there and put it into the 4th one, same exact thing should occur regardless. So the question is, how do we test all 4 at the same time? I don't have an answer for that because it really would need 4 monitors. So as far as I know, all 4 HDMI ports have always worked. The question is, will they all work simultaneously? So apparently there wasn't a problem with 3 of them working simultaneously, but there must have been some kind of problem when you're trying to run 4 simultaneously, and that's what that BIOS update is for. That's the only conclusion I can come to. Now, I would never use more than 3 monitors. Using 2, pretty commonplace, but speaking of that, let me show you something. something I just came across the other day. Let me go full screen here. And let me open up Amazon. And let me share the web page with you here. Let's see. LG has a monitor, or right here, this monitor right here is a 34-inch monitor that does essentially 1980 by 1920. It does HD, 1080, but it's the equivalent of 2 monitors side by side. And you can actually take the video output of a computer that you would run, let's say video output to monitor 1 and video output to monitor 2, and plug them both into this monitor. And then this monitor will emulate being 2 monitors. At least that's my understanding of how it works. So we would use HDMI in number 1 and HDMI in number 2. And effectively you can push a button and the screen splits to completely in half, monitor 1 and monitor 2. So that's a pretty good price, but what's even more amazing is if we scroll down here to see what they have returned. Saved with used in good condition at $218. There should be another option here. New and used, right here, new and used from $186. Now here's what's interesting. I believe this is coming from Amazon's warehouse. Yes, this is coming from Amazon warehouse, and this is really important. I'm going to click add to cart, and when I do that, it should tell me how many of these they have in the Amazon warehouse. So if I click view cart, well, I don't know why that's in there. Oh, it says there's only 1 left in stock. The other day it said it had 20 in stock. So for under $200, you're getting a 34-inch wide screen that you can use as 2 monitors, or you can just use it as 1. And it's an IPS screen, which is, I have an Asus IPS monitor. I really like it a lot. It's not as good as OLED and stuff, but look at how cheap that is. I think it's a really good deal. As long as you don't want 4K, it's a great alternative to having 2 monitors. Just buy this one and plug 2 video inputs in it and use it as 2 monitors. I think that's pretty cool. And even buying it brand new, I mean at $249, so you have your full warranty, which you likely won't have with something returned. $249 is a great price. So when I get one in, I'll test it and maybe do a review on it. But it's my understanding that's how that works. And you could certainly search YouTube with this in the title to see what other content creators have said about it, where they do unboxings and stuff. Very attractive price. And let me go back over to the chat room here. Sarge Tech says his sister has that monitor and she loves it. Chris Garrett said 34 inches is too big for a monitor. I think I'd rather just have 2 monitors. Yeah, but if you've got 2 22-inch monitors, remember it's measured diagonally. It probably will take up less space than 2 monitors. YD Boss said, isn't this just 2 monitors but borderless? Kinda. Yeah, if you just want to run it as 1 monitor, you can, and just stretch the image out across the screen. It says the monitor is WQHD, wide quad high definition, not 1080p. So 1080 is the resolution, right? I was trying to, I was doing 1920 plus 1920, but it's a little different than that. It's a little off. So, but the 1080 is the standard HD resolution in that direction. Yeah, the IPS monitors, the IPS technologies. Once I went to an IPS monitor, I didn't want to. All the other monitors just weren't good enough for me. So I go to customers and I see their monitor, and it's like, oh, I really appreciate my IPS monitor. Now, again, that technology is pretty old by today's standards, and it was an expensive. It added to the price of the monitor to get IPS back in the day, but now it's pretty commonplace, even on cheaper monitors. And now the more expensive monitors are like OLED, for example. Where is Nutty? It's right there. Brian Larson says, I bought the Asus RT AX82U from Amazon via your link. I waited a week for nothing. I reordered it and got it in a day, and it works good. Thanks. Hey, well, thanks for the follow-up. I'm glad to hear you like it. Chris Garrett, yes, I covered your question very early in on the video, and when we're done today, you'll be able to replay that. YD Boss wants to know, should I buy a pre-built PC or build it myself? I'm just 16. I've never built a PC. I have no knowledge except from YouTube. Well, I don't know how you think you're going to get the knowledge without building it. YouTube or, reading forums is no replacement for experience. If that's an experience you want to have, then you should have that experience. If you don't really have much interest in building a computer, it sounds like work, or you feel like it's too much anxiety, then buy a pre-built. It's a decision nobody can make for you. But rest assured that if it's something you want to do, you can do it. Building a computer is relatively easy. Just a matter of making sure the parts you get will all be compatible and fit together within the case, the confines of the case you pick. And yeah, sites like PC Part Picker can help you to ensure that there's no compatibility problems with the parts you're selecting. Is Mitch showing up tomorrow afternoon? That's what the Greek wants to know. No, I don't. Unfortunately, I don't have any work for Mitch. So, like if he were here tomorrow and I've got to review this little Ace Magician mini PC tomorrow, apart from Mitch standing there watching me, there's really, I don't have anything for him to do. So no, he's not scheduled for another show until I have a project where I can use his help. So right now, I've been working on the backlog for all those motherboards Mitch and I did together. I still have 10 of them that need to go into cases and be done. And of course, that's not something that Mitch is necessarily interested in. And so I have to just finish all the work that we started before we start anything new. So at this point right now, it's just me, and it'll likely be that way for some time until I get caught up with all the work, all those motherboards he and I prepped. At one point I had about 60, so I'm down to 10. I've got most of it dealt with, but there's still, 10 is still a lot. What about the camera girl? That's what Matt Soloff wants to know. Yeah, she usually helps out on Friday videos with close-up camera work. I don't know if we're going to need much close-up camera work on tomorrow's video, which again is a newer model of mini PC from the folks over at Ace Magician, but maybe. We'll just see how it goes. Sarge Tech says, I keep missing the Monday members only stream. How do I get notified? You just have to turn notifications on. Basically, every Monday at 1 o'clock Phoenix time is when I do my members only live stream. You really shouldn't need any notification. It's always the same time and the same day. There are people, several viewers have reached out who are getting notifications, they don't want them, and several viewers are reaching out who want them and aren't getting them. And because I can't reach out and configure it for you, I can almost guarantee that the people who aren't getting notifications are unknowingly blocking themselves from getting them. But there's so many different ways to get notifications, whether that's through your phone, using the YouTube app and making sure your phone's allowing that app to show the notifications in your phone settings, to make sure that you're logged into YouTube in the app, to make sure that if you're on the desktop, you know, how you want to get the notifications, you have to tell YouTube how you want the notifications to be delivered to you. And then when you subscribe to a channel, you have to say if you want notifications for that specific channel and whether or not you want all notifications from that channel or just some notifications from that channel. So you have multiple places you have to check. So depending on if you're using a phone or a tablet, you're going to get the notifications from the app. You must be signed into the app, and you must be in your phone settings and change the defaults, which typically block notifications from apps you're downloading. You need to override that. If you want it set up in email, you need to go into your YouTube settings and make sure that you've got it set for how you want to be notified. And then you need to be subscribed to a channel with the bell icon selected for all notifications for each channel you want notifications from. So again, by having scheduled shows, we know every Monday at 1 o'clock Phoenix time, you can put a little calendar reminder in whatever you're using for email, whether it's Gmail or Outlook, just put a calendar reminder. Members only Mondays at 1 o'clock. You don't need notifications. And on Fridays, I'm always live on Fridays at 1 o'clock. So you don't need notifications. It's always the same. Now, when it comes to Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, it's iffy right now depending on my time. Like, I've had a number of machines to get out this week. In fact, I'm not done yet. And I'm not quite sure about next week, but I know I have at least 2 or 3 more to get out next week. And so that's impeding my ability to do any videos until I get those computers done, and those customers are patiently waiting for me. But no matter what, I dedicate Monday at 1 o'clock for my members, and I dedicate Friday at 1 o'clock for everybody. So as long as you know that, it never changes. So notifications, you can set up yourself as reminders in your phone or in your email application. You don't need to rely on a third party to provide those to you. So I hope that helps. Roystar Man wants to know if I have any plans to show a new Synology NAS. I heard they support NVMe and can add a 2.5 gig port. I recently purchased a Synology NAS, and it does not support 2.5 gig or NVMe. A couple of conditions you need to understand is that I would also need a 2.5 gig switch. And while some routers may have a 2.5 gig port, I've never seen a router that was filled with 2.5 gig ports, and just having one is not beneficial. The only way having one 2.5 gig port helps is if you have multi-gig internet. They don't even offer multi-gig internet in Arizona, as far as I know. 1 gig is about as fast as you can go. There might be some secluded little areas where you can get more than that, but 1 gig is pretty much, that's it. That's the top. It's Cox Gigablast is what it's called. And even that only has a 35 megabit upload, and it's 1,000 down. So a 2.5 gig port doesn't help you unless you have some high-speed fiber optic. Furthermore, having an NVMe drive in a Synology is kind of a waste of money because, first of all, you can't boot off of the NVMe on the Synology. And that's one of the frustrations is they take a while to boot up. to get them started. Now, in most cases, you just leave a NAS powered on anyway, but for me, I'll power up a NAS and take it offline or whatever, because I need the bench space when I'm doing videos. I don't have anywhere else to put it. So then you need a computer that has a 2.5 gig port. And my main office computer here is wireless, so that doesn't do me any good. But assuming you had a 2.5 gig NAS and you had a 2.5 gig switch and you had a 2.5 gig hardline wired computer that's plugged in, your file transfer is still going to be limited by the speed of the drives, these mechanical spinners. Doesn't make much sense. So I can't see any rhyme or reason for the average person to benefit from that in any way. Your limitations on the drives. So yes, if you get the NVMe drives installed and you want to use those as additional storage and you have 2.5 gig, you're probably looking somewhere around, well, a couple $1,000s to get yourself set up with that. That would be very hard to justify a return on investment of that kind of money unless you are doing a screaming ton of I/O every day, all day. Otherwise, it just doesn't make sense to shave off a couple of seconds. So yeah, I don't have any plans to review that because it's not practical, and I don't think many people would see any benefit from it. Not yet anyway, maybe in the future. If the Synology NAS would allow you to put the operating system on the NVMe drive and boot from that, hey, that would be worth it. But yeah, you have to understand how much money has to be spent on the surrounding infrastructure for you to see any benefit from that. Garfield Rupe says, Carrie, how about what I do every Monday? I find any Carrie Holzman video and right beside subscribe, I check perks, and that's where I find the next members only video. Oh, see, I didn't even know that. I appreciate the information here. Chris Garrett said he was at his doctor last week and the computers at the doctor's office have Windows 11 and I saw other places around with Windows 11. So I guess businesses are jumping on board. Well, it's interesting how we see what we want to see. Businesses are not jumping on board to Windows 11 overall. But what you can do, you can go to Google and you can see what the Windows 11 market share is of operating systems. So if we, instead of just looking around and noticing what you choose to notice and not noticing what you're unconsciously not aware you're not noticing, you're going to come to these false conclusions, right? So if we just did a search for Windows 11 market share, it is growing, it is climbing, obviously, but it's pretty slow. This article says Windows 11 represents nearly 28% market share. So that's less than 1/3 of all computers. So yeah, it's not even at the halfway point yet. But again, as Windows 10 ages and as more computers are being sold that are coming preloaded with Windows 11, that number can only get bigger. But small businesses like lawyers or doctors' offices and such, they don't traditionally have the policy and protocol requirements of large corporations. When you have, a company like Intel that has 5,000 computers just at their Chandler campus, and they've got campuses all over the world, and there's thousands of computers at each campus, and they all have to work within the infrastructure of the company's IT as well as support. It's not an easy deployment to make. It's not a cheap deployment to make. It's a lot of IT labor. There's a lot of retraining of the employees on how to use it. And so unless there is a return on investment for that amount of labor that has to be put into upgrading a company of that size, they're not going to do it just because it's there. There has to be a financial reckoning where that makes sense, because you're paying your IT department, you're paying your employees to work, and if your employees are less productive because of this operating system change and they have to, navigate around to find what they're looking for, if your IT department, on top of maintaining what's in existence, also has to then go to each desktop and upgrade it by hand to Windows 11 and then require Windows 11 be configured to meet the corporate security and other protocol requirements, it is a massive labor expense. But a small doctor's office or a dentist, they have a handful of computers. They're typically privately owned. Generally a dentist has their own practice. There's not a whole lot of chain dentist offices. There are, but it's not as common. And same with lawyers. And then those people make up their own rules, right? They don't have shareholders to answer to, for example. And the folks that are shareholders, the companies that are publicly owned, traded in, have stocks and shares that are traded on Wall Street, you have to answer to those people because they're investing money in your company and you're spending their money and they want returns on their investment. So when you have to make that fiscal report every quarter to your shareholders on what we're anticipating the profits or losses to be and explain why, you could have shareholders get upset by that, take their money and sell their shares and put it somewhere else. So companies switching an operating system, it has to have a return on investment that makes sense. It can be very, very bad consequences, financial consequences. So you're going to have to be able to justify Windows 11. You've got to be able to tell the shareholders why this investment makes sense, what we're going to be able to do as a result, just like you would with any other investment. We're not just spending money to spend money. You've got to be able to justify why you're spending it. And in the case of Windows 11, as far as I can tell, it's just Windows 10. So until there's a reason that we can identify that would make that large investment pay for itself and in higher profits and higher productivity, it ain't going to happen. When Windows 10 reaches its end of life, many corporations will have no choice. Some can opt for extended support from Microsoft on an individual basis. A large company with tens of thousands of licenses to Microsoft can make deals with Microsoft you and I can't make. So just keep that in mind. That's just the way the business world works. And see if you guys have any other questions for me. Otherwise, we're right at about 2 hours. I like to keep these videos around 2 hours. But I will stick around as long as you have questions. I'll do my best to answer them. If you've asked a question and I haven't addressed it, it's probably because I haven't seen it. So feel free to ask again. And barring that, if there are no other questions, I will just finish up for the day. As I mentioned, tomorrow we have the Ace Magician computer review. And as far as this computer goes, I was hearing the fan before when it was here doing the Windows updates. I'm not hearing it at all now. It is absolutely 100% silent. So certainly that BIOS update did something. And I would need to replay the video back and look at what my BIOS version or EC version was to just double check that I didn't just put the same BIOS right back on it. HFC says, what do you think about covering TrueNAS or Open Media Vault or something like that on the channel? Is that something you think your parents would be interested in? Is that something you think that most people who go to Best Buy and buy a computer would have interest in that? Because my channel is really designed to be around the average computer. user, not the enthusiast stuff. And what you're talking about, in my opinion, is very niche. It applies to a very small percentage of computer owners that would have interest in that content type. And so the type of content you can expect from me is general knowledge. And when I do reviews, it's just typical stuff people might be interested in buying. It's not super exclusive, high-end, niche products. There might be an exception here or there. But overall, I try to make the content appeal to as many people as possible. And let the enthusiasts stick to the enthusiast crowd. Andy Kane said, what's the difference between FAT32 and exFAT? Well, it's a completely different file allocation table. It's completely different. And exFAT allows for that interconnectivity or compatibility between Windows and Mac, as far as like moving a flash drive or a storage drive. That's its primary thing. But because exFAT is so new, and it's EXFAT, not the letter X, but the letter EX in the word FAT, it's very complicated to get into it. But you could certainly read a Wikipedia article about exFAT, why it exists. Part of the reason why there's an incompatibility with it is just it's new compared to FAT32, which has been around decades. So as a result, many motherboards, when you boot into the BIOS, simply can't see exFAT. And I don't really see any benefit from it personally, because I'm not switching from taking a flash drive and moving it from Windows to Mac. It's all Windows to Windows. So, yeah. Flipper Flop said FAT32 has a maximum file size of 4 gigs. This is true. And the maximum partition size is 8 terabytes. But yes, if you were to try and move a file that was 6 gigs, like one file that was 6 gigs, say you have a movie, and you try to copy that movie onto a FAT32 flash drive, and the FAT32 flash drive, let's say it's 16 gigs in size, let's just say, and you're just wanting to copy a 6 gig file, you will get an error message that says not enough space. And you're going to say, now wait a minute, it's only a 6 gig file going onto a 16 gig flash drive. It should have much more space than it needs. It's really that the file allocation table, the FAT32, mathematically cannot get to a single file over 4 gigabytes. It just won't copy it. And so by going to exFAT, then that's like an enhanced version of FAT32 that allows you to have much larger file sizes. But you could just go to NTFS. Just format it as NTFS, you don't have to worry about it. Unless you're taking that flash drive and plugging it into a Mac, then the Mac won't be able to read it. I think there might be some add-ons you can add to the Mac, the operating system. I can't remember anymore. I don't work in the Apple world, so. Andre Hernandez says, hey, Carrie, I got the computer you sent. Everything looks fine. I haven't had time to turn it on, and thank you. Hey, Andre, thanks for the update. Sorry it took a while to get it out to you, but glad to hear you received it okay. And yeah, I'd be curious how you like it once you get it up and running. Andy says he's learning file systems for an A+ certification course, and which is why he was asking his question. Yeah, I think Wikipedia is going to be your friend in that regard, because they'll get into more of the technical stuff. I will tend to lean on oversimplifying things for getting people the gist of the information. I'm not trying to turn anybody into a qualified technician. What I am trying to do is empower people to understand the overall gist of the technology and what it does. And then if any of the numerous subjects that I talk about and I give the gist of, if any of those things you want to learn more details about, Google is your friend, and I've made the introduction and given you the concept. And if you want to take it to a deeper level, have at it. That's the whole point of it, right? Is teaching a man to fish. Having you know what information you're looking for versus what information you're not interested in. And that's what the sort of the overall gist when I'm introducing technology, that's what I'm trying to establish. I don't want to go into the details of any specific technology that 90% of the audience has no interest in. So once you know what to look for, you can find all the detail as deep as you want to get using Google. Kenton Morton says, Carrie must have an Intel inside. How do you remember all the information? I used to service Novell, and I can only remember one command console, one console command. Honestly, some information is just more or less ubiquitous. Other information I don't retain as well. It just depends on, when we talk about file allocation tables, we only have basically 4 to choose from. So it's not a lot to remember. They don't change very often. But other things like Wi-Fi standards, which are constantly changing, or Gen 3 versus Gen 4 versus Gen 5 on PCIe, and how that translates into potentially faster storage speeds and what all that means and what you can expect. Again, it's about what's talked about most often, or what hasn't changed much over the years. Those are the things that I tend to remember best. So yeah, file allocation tables or formats are easy because there's just a few of them to pick from. And they don't change very often. Hey, there's Mitch Morrison joining us in the chat room. He's got today's dad joke. He says, have you heard the joke about paper? Never mind, it's terrible. Terrible. It's pretty bad when you have to explain the joke. Thank you, Mitch. All right, guys, I think I've given it enough time for any other questions. I'm not seeing them, so we'll wrap it up for today. And I will be live tomorrow at 1 o'clock Phoenix time. That's 12 p.m. Pacific time, 3 p.m. Eastern time. Hopefully you'll join me then as we review the new Ace Magician. In the meantime, the GTR6 BIOS update was a pretty interesting experience. Didn't take much time to flash it. And if you're considering buying one of these, I got to tell you, I think it's worth it. I'm very impressed with this little unit here. And I really appreciate the folks at Beelink sending it to me for review. And I'm sure we're going to see it again, as I might just keep this one out on the desk to use for, anytime I need to go to the web or demonstrate software. This might be a good system for that. Actually, it's a bit overkill for that. But I'm also thinking of sending one of the mini PCs over to Doug Betts. If you're not watching his channel, you should definitely check out Live Windows Training with Doug Betts. And he's also a working computer technician, over 30 years in the industry, and he likes to help out individuals with their computer problems during his live videos. So that'll wrap it up. Oh, and there goes my doorbell. All right, well, I guess that's going to wrap it up for me. I will see you all again very, very soon. Until next time, bye for now.